from the perspective of the civil society, of the NGOs, and maybe a lot of you have already heard about last reports, let's say, for example, from Amnesty International concerning the cobalt production in the Congo, or the last report from Terre des Hommes concerning mica production in India, dealing with child labor and so on. These are very serious results, and we have to deal with them and have to take care how we can do it in a feasible way. I will now take the next minutes to show you a little bit from our perspective how we try, as a business perspective, to accept and to implement the standards for social and ecological issues in our global value chain. And we start, therefore, with two quotations concerning this. On the one side, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, he will now leave his position at the end of the year. I think bring it in a very precise perspective. Business have a crucial role to play in supporting human rights and social justice. They have formidable resources. They operate in a political sensitive environment. Their activities have a profound impact on people's lives and the key global issues. Our challenge is to make sure, and I think this is important, that business is not part of the problem, but the source of solution. So human rights must be respected at every step of the production chain. And I will come back a little bit later to the so-called Ruggie framework, named from John Ruggie, a Harvard professor who was responsible for developing a really important human rights program. And he quoted, "It is a minimum expectation society has of business conduct in the relation to human rights. It means that as a business goes about its business, it should not infringe on the rights of others. So manufacture your mousetraps, deliver whatever service you provide, but don't infringe on others' human rights in the process." I will show you a little bit how we try to deal with these challenges. You can see there are a lot of interfaces between business units and human rights, for example, in a company like ours, starting with environment, the rights of health and resource protection, or dealing with our human resources, diversity, transparency, recruitment processes, dealing with sustainability, my duty in reporting and monitoring systems, or with governance, risk and compliance, prevention of corruption. And most important, especially for these issues, the procurement department, the working conditions all along the supply chain, ecological requirements, transport safety, and so on. I think all in all, we are facing a lot of challenges, at least the complexity, the normative challenge, the cost of monitoring and so on, the knowledge we need for this distribution of roles. But I think especially we have a lot of chances in this direction, and we try to bring this in reality. Implementation of international standards, the development with our suppliers, and minimizing the risk of litigation, and so on. I will show it as an exemplary issue from the already mentioned Volkswagen Group from my colleague, and I will illustrate the figures you mentioned a little bit earlier. No, I think you are completely right. You may know Volkswagen Group is really a global company with 12 brands. Not only 12 brands, maybe you have already heard, we have now created, so to speak, a 13th brand, especially dealing with mobility services, with mobility devices. But this is another topic, how we are now really facing a very, very deep transformation. We will completely change our business, not only in technical issues concerning the e-mobility, you may know, but also how we organize the total value chain. For example, there will you find a kind of a migration of the value chain from the production line to the more after-sales activities, especially the mobility provider and so on. And with this new brand, so to speak, we try to compete, for example, business like Uber or other ones with our ride-hailing systems and so on. So you will see a completely changed phase of the mobility system, I think, in the next 2 decades. But, and these are the figures, they are the proof of you already mentioned. When you see, for example, we sold more than 10 million cars last year, but most of them 8.7 million outside of Germany, but also we produced nearly 75% of these cars also outside of Germany. And we deal with employees, more than the 50%, they are located in locations outside of Germany, though without any doubt, and we have also a purchasing volume from 150 billion euros, so a huge amount, and this indeed comes from more than 50 different countries. But this are really global activities, this is global economy, and I think to make sure that this is also at a standard, accepting human rights, accepting social ecological requirements, then I think this could be really a chance that we can do, like Ban Ki-moon already mentioned, that we are part of the solution of this and not the origin of the problem. We have therefore really global procurement network in terms of sustainability, and we try to manage these activities with all our colleagues around the world to support us when there are upcoming critical issues, and we try to deal with these colleagues in a continuous optimization process. In general, I think it is important to see what is, so to speak, the normative order for our activities. On the one side, the inner circle, these are the stakeholder guidelines from OECD, from the ILO, from the United Nations, of course. And then we have, therefore, a lot of corporate guidelines. We have a code of conduct for our business partners. This is what I will a little bit illustrate later. But we have also our own Charter for Labor Relations, the Declaration of our Social Rights, a code of conduct, and so on. So we have a lot of policies around our activities, and this is the normative part. More important is, I think, really a very strong impulse coming from the last, let's say, 5-10 years, and this is what the so-called UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights means, the so-called Ruggie framework from the already mentioned John Ruggie. And this means the respect, the protect, and the remedy parts. And I think this is very important when you take into your account what we have already heard in the discussions in the earlier time. Then I think it's really also important that we have, on the one side, a collaboration in these fields, but also, let's say, a clear kind of division of labor, so to speak, a division of work. Because the question, the challenge of protect is a question of the states, of the government, of the international organizations. And the duty of the business is to respect these human rights and to make sure in the whole value chain how we can deal with this and how we can make sure that we have not only the standards of ecological and social requirements in, let's say, European locations, but all around the world with decent workplaces and so on. And therefore, we have implemented a circle of processes, of management procedures, starting with the policies, with a continuous analysis, integration, and communication, and very important also, especially in the international context, the access to remedy, as already John Ruggie pointed out in his studies. I will not go into detail, but I mentioned we have very systematical corporate guidelines in these fields concerning the environmental protections, but also the employee rights and the other activities. And this is, I think, very important for us. We have really a continuous analysis for an early warning system all around the world, and therefore we can really make use of the different actors in these fields. How can maybe there coming up a critical issue with some of these sources you have to take in your mind that the value chain of a car producer is really very, very complex, because this is not only the so-called first-tier supplier, but the value chain means that you have more than 8 or 9 steps until you come, let's say, to the original sources. And therefore it is so important that you have a kind of early warning system all around the world for these critical issues. Then the next step is that if you go in contact with these suppliers, that you have a systematical integrity check. And most important then, if you have really a contract with the suppliers, that you have the idea how you can together make sure that these requirements from our side are implemented also in the business activities of the suppliers. And therefore, for example, we implemented an e-learning system and development system. We made, for example, a lot of training schemes all around the world. These are activities we are not only running by our own company. This is, for example, a field for collaboration also with other activities. So, for example, we have a very intensive collaboration with, in this field, our competitors, with other OEMs like Toyota, like BMW, Ford, and Mercedes. We are collaborating in the world of training schemes. For example, we are running trainings in Mexico, we are running trainings in Turkey, we are running trainings in Romania. And this is, I think, very important that you can see there that we are trying to make sure that our requirements concerning the suppliers in the different lines are really implemented, and therefore we can make sure that these ideas, these programs from our side have the opportunity also to be realized in this different suppliers. Suppliers means in this case, on the one side, very small companies, only a few employees, but also huge companies, similar hugeness like ours, for example, when you think about a company like Bosch or others. So there we are not running in problems without any doubt, because they have the same standards without any doubt as we have. But it becomes more and more problematic when you are going a little bit more in depth in the value chain. For example, when you are deal with the producers of B-car in India, or with cobalt in the Congo, and therefore you have to make sure that this is an opportunity to identify the risks, but also then to create the solutions and sometimes together. I think an also important aspect of make sure that human rights standards are implemented in the value chain is the access to remedy. We have, for example, there in this field implemented for our own company, but also in the supply chain, ombudsman system in different languages and so on, so that at every place, at every time, there's an opportunity to bring in your issues. What happens in a critical case in suspicion, then we have implemented a very systematic process with the report, with a team of experts, but also with a qualification program. I think this is very important that we try to develop these activities with our suppliers. At the end of the day, that then will be the critical issue solved, and that we have more or less the same standards in these cases. Therefore, the aim is a collaborative dialogue, and mostly I can say this is also the result if there are arising critical issues. But you can also see here if there are serious issues, and if there are no chances to develop, there is no willingness to develop, then we will also terminate these contracts. And so, for example, the contract we had with specific suppliers concerning this mica mine in India, mentioned in this Terre des Hommes report at the the beginning of this year, we terminated, for example, these contracts with the suppliers, because I think this is the last chance to really accept our policies in these fields. To sum up, human rights have gained enormously in importance, not least because on the United Nations activities and the initiated so-called Ruggie framework with the steps protect, respect, and remedy. I think this was really a very, very important step to popularize all these activities, the sensibility for all these activities, and it was a strong impulse for the business community to deal in this direction. So I think when we are discussing a lot about the failure of United Nations and so on, I think then we have also to emphasize that there are a lot of activities in these cells that they are really very, very effective, and they have a lot of very impressive work done in the last year. So I think this has to be balanced a little bit in this case. Volkswagen has not only anchored the system with social and environmental standards within the group's locations, but also, as I tried to explain in the last minutes, along the supply chain. Ensuring compliance with these standards is achieved by means of a multi-stage procedure, which includes a continuous risk analysis, as I mentioned earlier, and very important, the integration into the management processes, inclusive e-learning procedures, the monitoring and the audited, and very important, the access to remedy with international ombudsman systems. Our idea and our focus is to develop all these things with our suppliers and not against the suppliers. So thank you for your attention.
Is it working? Yes, it is working. So, as we thank Dr. Prätorius for his talk, I will open the floor for a couple of questions, short questions and concise answers. Please, sir.
I think the reason why Volkswagen and other firms moved out to countries where labor was cheap and cost of manufacture was down may now be reversed, because when automation and artificial intelligence brings the cost down, it may be advisable to bring all the factories back to the countries of manufacture. Do you think this might happen?
Very interesting question. Maybe there are some tendencies that the labor costs are not so important as in the past, and for automation, for example, the robotization of work brings really a cost advantage when you are implementing this in locations in Europe, for example. This is one side of the picture. But I think most important is that the main motive, the main reason why we implemented locations, for example, in Mexico or in South Africa and other locations, is maybe the first step was cost reduction, but now it is to stay near to the customer. And I think, as I mentioned with the figures, this was very important, and therefore we will never, let's say, come back from Mexico or something like this, because we have in all these countries also, without neglecting serious social problems, fast-growing, so to speak, middle class. And this middle class is very confined to individual mobility. So when we will sell our cars in the future, I think we must be there in these different countries and produce not only the cars there, but also sell the cars there. And therefore, I think even when we will change our production technology, this will not have the result that we will bring back our employees or our locations. The other side will be the reality. We will much faster export the newest technology from Germany or from Europe locations into the other locations. So let's say history. 30 years ago, when we started our production in China, then maybe some of you will remember we started there with our very old models, with our very old assembly lines and all these things. But this has in these 30 years completely changed. The most advanced assembly lines, the most advanced technologies are now in China or in other countries, even completely equal with the qualities in Germany, for example. So therefore, technical will change without any doubt. The question of labor costs will not be so relevant in the future because of automation, robotization, but the interconnection, the global networks of the production lines will be so stable, and especially the nearness of the customer will be the cause that there will not, so to speak, a setback of the globalization. I'm deeply convinced that globalization will go on.
Hello sir, I'm Himanshu, an MBA student at University of London. I just did a brand audit of Volkswagen in my curriculum, and I'm a very big Volkswagen fan. I own an Audi and a Volkswagen. My family loves Volkswagen. I had a question for you, sir. Volkswagen is one of the top brands. It has been consistently ranked in the top 100 brands by Interbrand also. But recently, in the recent times, there was a Volkswagen scandal on pollution, and which was noticed globally. Being an avid Volkswagen follower, and you even talked about environmental sustainability and touched a few things about macro management issues of Volkswagen. Can you please elaborate the steps that Volkswagen took after the scandal? Because that somehow, somewhere, little bit, tarnished a little bit to, all brands go through brand crisis. But somehow, if there are any steps that you took after that to ensure that these things doesn't happen in future, because environmental sustainability is the next big thing that the world is discussing right now.
Thank you for this question. I think it will take a long answer, but I will try to choose. Without any doubt, this was a huge scandal. We cheated, and this was absolutely without any tolerance, and we have to pay now a lot of money for this failure we produced, without any doubt. And you may know this is an ongoing procedure, especially in the United States, and therefore it is difficult to say what we have done in detail. But before we have this so-called final settlement in this field, but I can tell you we have done already a lot to avoid that a similar issue could arise. For example, we have already changed more than 2/3 of the top management at this level. And we have implemented what we call a kind of change of culture in this field. We have implemented a huge campaign starting with new values, with integrity campaigns and so on. More important from my point of view is that we are really in a deep period of transformation, not only in our company, but in the whole industry, as I earlier mentioned, with this electrification, digitization, and all these processes. So, from my point, especially from my team and my duty in this field, I can say this crisis was a kind of an accelerator of transformation. So, without any doubt, there was a serious problem. This cost us a lot of money, and this will be acceptable because what we have done is absolutely unacceptable. This is okay. But then after this, we have really implemented a huge change process, and from this point of view, you can sometimes think crises are sometimes accelerators of changes. And this is what we are now trying to do with our huge campaign in electrification, digitization, with this new campaign of mobility services and so on. So on the one side, deep crisis, never seen things like this, but on the other side, I think there are some upcoming perspectives with these new ideas of a really sustainable mobility system.
Thank you, Honorable Jonasson, and thank you firstly to thank our colleague Mark Donfield for the opportunity to be here, and to thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm quite encouraged by the direction that VW is taking, especially looking at your value chain from a sustainability point of view, because that's the new business approach, and it's a commendable approach, which is in line with the UN Global Compact. My first question would be, do you extend your approach to peer leadership? Because I've seen with Siemens, they also had a crisis relating to corruption, and they learned their lessons. When they changed their own system to improve integrity, they've now become a leader in industry, encouraging their peers to corruption-proof their companies. So I'd be interested in what VW is doing. The second question is the ombudsman. I was interested because I'm a former ombudsman myself. Where in your system, I saw that you're present in about 121 centers in 5 or 6 continents. I wasn't quite sure. Where would you find the ombudsman? Is it centralized or decentralized? And secondly, what are the powers? Are they advisory, or does your ombudsman have hard power to make binding decisions? My last question has to do with feeder communities. For lack of a better word, the Torbeck Foundation encourages businesses to not only look at their value chain in terms of their customers and employees, but also to look at the communities where the companies are located and look at what is being given back to those companies. And I was quite intrigued when the colleague was saying, isn't it time to go back to your original country? But when that happens, the community that was supporting this company is often left high and dry. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of questions. Maybe I can try to make it really short and only some comments. Starting with the last question, as I already mentioned, IP really is there that we are on the one side a German company, but we are really a global company. For example, in South Africa, we are a South African company because we are producing there our cars, I think, longer than 60 years ago, and therefore we have a lot of organizing contacts with communities. And for example, my colleagues there, Nongubela Malisa, is there responsible for CSR. They are running a lot of projects in this field in terms of education, especially, for example, I remember a very interesting CSR project where we support young girls to try to find interest, especially in educational, in terms of natural science and mathematics and so on. So this is a very specific program, but it is, my colleague mentioned, really very, very successful. And this is only one example where we can see that I think we are really very strongly interlinked already with these countries and these communities in these fields. And therefore, I can't imagine that we will reduce our locations, because this is not only a question, of course, as I already mentioned, it's a question of integration in the communities, and the question of sales markets and so on. So I think this is independent from the other ideas. The ombudsman system we implemented now, I think 10 or 12 years ago, is from our point of view really very effective, but because they are really very independent, you have the opportunity with, I think, 8 different languages to stay in contact with them, and they work there really effectively, but they are really ombudsmen as a transmitter of this information. The other activities has to be run inside of the company. So this was the second question. Sorry, I forgot.
Are you also serving as peer educators?
Yes,
influencers in the industry?
You remember the
Yes.
Siemens case, yes?
Yes.
So there are a lot of cases in the history without any doubt. No, we are really in a good contact with Siemens, and we have, for example, analyzed very intensively what they have done after their crisis, and I think they did a lot of things right, and therefore we have similar consequences, and I can tell you we are really now running with very, very ambitious ideas in this field. on the one side inside the company, for example, with this integrity campaign, with this cultural change campaign, but on the other side also the technical transformation will accelerate in these cases. I'm personally deeply convinced we were not so ambitious with the electrification of our new cars and with the mobility provider activities than we were without this crisis. Therefore, this crisis is really a kind of an accelerator, and we have the same ideas as a leadership coming in the future than, for example, Siemens had.
Well, on that note, let us express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Prätorius for an excellent keynote address. Thank you.